Learn to leverage a language instruction circle in 20 minutes. I am Sarah Mogtotter, and this is the latest video in the Learn to in 20 Minutes series. A circle is a simple way to group students. So simple that at first you might miss the genius of it. When you ask your students to get out from behind their desks to face their classmates and look each other in the eye, you will find that more students get a chance to speak. As you will hear about in this presentation, a circle can build community and lead to supported communication. It is also a method to bring play into the classroom. Let me introduce myself briefly. I'm a 20-year educator who taught with engaging methods based on research in second language acquisition. My current interest is to provide professional development for teachers. I want to share the knowledge that experience brings to make teaching easier and more effective for others. This is a hobby and a passion for me. My purpose here is to give you the courage and motivation to try out the circle. Set a goal of every day or once a week for a set amount of time. It is an experiment to prove to yourself the value of the circle. You will quickly see the power of standing in a circle without chairs or desks, and I promise you will be hooked. The most effective way to teach how to start the practice of a circle is to do a walkthrough. My advice to you would be to hold circle at the beginning of class and then for the rest of the period to proceed as you usually would. When in the unit would a circle fit? Circle would not be the way to start out a unit because during circle, students do a lot of output, and input is the way to start with new targeted vocabulary. At the beginning of a unit, students listen and read new vocabulary through activities like a group read aloud of a book, a movie talk, or listening to a song. Once they have heard the targeted vocabulary repeated a few times through these interpretive activities, students will be more ready to use the vocabulary themselves in interpersonal activities. Remember, input before output. This picture, taken in the university setting, shows an ideal open space for a circle where there is also enough room for chairs to be pushed back. Students are able to set up the room for circle and then put back the tables and chairs afterwards. My circles look a lot more scrappy, and I want you to know that if you don't have good space for instruction, you can still do a circle. Form your circle around a few clustered tables at the front or back of your room. Students are amazingly flexible and resilient. If you show a little good humor and resolve, they follow right along. This slide is in the resources folder, so you don't have to stop to take notes. Here are the steps as I am going to present them. Call to circle, body warm-up, language warm-up, share, activity, transition back. Call to circle. In the language classroom, routines are best set up with simple language that is repeated often. I say to my students in the target language, come to the circle. I say it the same way every time. A little note, the picture on this slide is of my colleagues and I playing around with ideas for circle. At the beginning, to show my dedication to this activity, I make sure the students are making the transition to circle by following my expectations, which are to not speak in English and to make a quick and orderly transition. If they don't, I send them back with humor and warmth. Likewise, when they get into the circle, if it is lopsided or doubled up at one point, I make a joke, asking if that's their best effort, by saying something as simple as, that's a circle, and work with them until they improve, prodding gently and with humor. Eventually, the students follow my lead and come to the circle without disruption. Body warm-up. If you are able to do a training with Organic World Language, OWL, you will learn a series of movements for transitions. Even if you haven't done their training, or until you do, you can ask your students to reach up and down or do any stretch that you love yourself. And in short, simple commands, you are able to teach them additional language. Up and down are enough to express the idea. I have seen the OWL instructor call out 1, 2, 3, and then the group claps together. The instructor repeats until students can really clap in unison, and that shows the teacher that the students are focused and ready. My colleagues ask students to touch their head, shoulders, knees, and toes, working vocabulary that we don't get to in our curriculum otherwise. The idea here is to get the mind limber with stretches for the body. It is important to note that for students in wheelchairs or differently abled, the circle can still work with small adjustments. Depending on ability, chair yoga or upper body stretching can be done while seated. Language warm-up. This is where you preview the language from the unit that you're doing to use in your share. Allow students a chance to hear that language from you before they are asked to produce. I have 3 different examples of ways to do this: polling students, thumbs up or down, and total physical response, TPR. First, my most beginning level device for input is polling students. I ask yes/no questions and ask students to respond affirmatively by raising their hand or taking a step into the circle. If students are still learning numbers, I then count how many students have hands up or are now in the center of the circle. Second, I have students show their responses with their thumbs up or thumbs down. If we are going to use adjectives to describe a friend, I ask them to show whether different character traits are positive or negative in their eyes for a true friend. I find this to be so useful. Allow me to try to explain what is so rich about this technique. As I run through, for example, adjectives that the students will use in the share to describe a friend, they listen, attempt to understand, and then evaluate the character trait and hold up or down their thumb to show me their response. I like the thinking they have to do, and I like that everyone has to respond. In fact, I ask everyone to wait until I have seen all responses. As always, if there is something that stands out, for example, there are members of the class who disagree with others, I will talk about this as it gives us a chance to go deeper in our thinking. Thumbs up, thumbs down can also be used to evaluate true-false statements. You may want to ask students to do this with their heads down to make them feel comfortable making mistakes. You can also add in hand on the head, which means the student is not sure, and helps the teacher understand how much more practice is needed. Use true-false statements when you are reviewing information before your share, which is especially useful in units that teach content in the target language. For example, a unit on housing around the world, or a specific country or culture, or a unit about living in your city or town. Third, total physical response lends itself well to previewing vocabulary. If you are going to ask during the share for students to tell you what they did over the weekend, you could ask the class to make up a gesture for a few different activities. Then, when you say an activity, they show you the gesture. Next, you do the gesture and the students say the activity, which can frankly be hilarious if the students use current culture to make their gestures and you're not that young. As relationships rely on mutual understanding, when students share, they improve their sense of belonging in a community. One word of caution though, at the novice low level, students usually share simple information, like their name and age. This information isn't that interesting to students and is information that they already know about each other. So try to remember that the point of the share is an opportunity to communicate on topics that will interest students, and choose your questions carefully. You can decide to do a whole group share or a partner share. Group share. The share can take place by going around the circle with each student taking a turn. Or you can do a popcorn share where students speak without an organized order. The share can be a one-word completion to a sentence, an answer to a question, or an opinion on a topic. These are good when you think that most students will have different answers that will interest the whole group. As students get closer to intermediate, model how to do follow-up questions. This modeling, which encourages elaboration, is an excellent way to help students level up from novice high to intermediate low in speaking. Partner share. I frequently have students do a share in pairs. Early in the year, I help students get into pairs, but quickly they can manage it themselves. I like that one can ask the other the question and the other can answer. Or they can do an interview where they ask and answer a series of questions. You can also have students get into 2 concentric circles, with the inner circle facing out and the outer circle facing in. Students pair up with one partner from the other circle. Then the inner circle rotates and all students have a new partner. After students share, I ask some students to report on what their partner answers, and as a group we discuss the most common answers or the most surprising answers. This last step is an essential step because it is a chance to try to make simple answers relevant and interesting. We may not care as much about individual answers, so let's take the discussion a step further to analyze the information we have collected. At the novice level, I use slides to give visual learners a prompt for the share and other steps of the circle. The next few slides show you what we have done as shares. They are also in the resources folder so that you can rewrite them in the language you are teaching and use them right away in class. How are you? Why? What do you like? What don't you like? How do you get to school? When I provide a few possible answers, my students know that they don't have to pick one of the 5 I have as examples. We've established in my classroom that they answer questions for themselves. But they are limited by what they can figure out to say or circumlocute their way to saying. I put language on the board to help them when they can't come up with an answer on their own. Questions for intermediates would be higher level, of course, and present more intrigue. In the case of this slide, think of a trip that you've taken. What did you do that was a little different from the norm? What did you think of that activity? Or for other examples, who is the person who has most influenced you? What is that person like? If you could have a celebrity as a friend, who would it be? Or react to this statement: students at this school don't sleep enough. As students are sharing, engage the class by asking them questions. See what they remember from what their classmates have said, or ask what answers the students think were most popular. If students have just shared what they did over the weekend, ask who had the most physically active weekend. You can do this partway through or at the end. Activity. Remember the idea that the way to leverage a circle for instruction is to use it for community building and to use it to bring play into your classroom. When we play games, students relax and take more risks with the language. For the theme of your current unit, there is probably an activity you can do to bring out that vocabulary. I'm going to give you some options of activities. If they are hard for you to remember, there are slides to share with your classes as you're explaining the game, which are in the resources folder. The first activity is darn. Count, but when you get to a multiple of a particular number or a number that contains that number, say darn. When anyone makes a mistake, the next person starts at 1 again. 1 to 10 concentration. In a circle, students try to count from 1 to 10, one by one, without planning out the order and without 2 people saying the same number at once. Students get multiple attempts to try, and each time they make a mistake, the teacher resets the game by saying, start. Line up by birthday. Speaking only in the target language, students line up in order of their birthdays, either by date, month, or both. Group juggle. A student asks a question, then tosses the ball to another student, who answers the question, and so on. Have students plan out the order on the first round, and then continue it. Add another ball, or a few more, as they get more comfortable. Interview. A student is chosen to be interviewed. Without revealing who, he or she decides to be someone else in the class. The class interviews the person in a talk show format, and the person answers all questions as if he or she were that other person. After 8 to 10 questions, the class can guess who he or she was. Jump. At the start of this activity, the teacher states a category. The teacher then points to a student and states a term. If the term doesn't fall into the category, the students on either side of the student being pointed at remain still. If the teacher says a term that does fall into the category, the students on either side of the student being pointed at jump. When students make a mistake or don't jump soon enough, they are out and sit down. As students get to intermediate mid, there is so much more possibility for activities. Here are 2 ideas. 60-second interviews. Give students a sheet of questions and pair students up. Ask each pair to choose one question that interests both of them. Have them interview each other and jot down their partner's name and something they want to remember that that partner said. Give pairs 60 seconds and then have them find a new partner. Do this a few times and then ask what they learned about their classmates. Answer to that question. Participants are given answers to 3 questions and then try to find the questions that match. Allow me to explain this further. The answers are about the leader, but they don't make sense until the corresponding question is found. Say my answers were purple, 16 months, and Japan. You can see on the slide some questions the students might brainstorm. They brainstorm a list in groups and then discuss until they decide which one is the correct question. The teacher listens to each group's guesses to see if anyone can get all 3 right. There are so many other ideas that I can't take the time to explain, so please refer to the list of additional activities in the resources folder. Transitions back. At the end of the circle is a nice opportunity to tell your students that you enjoyed speaking with them and that every day you feel you get to know them better. Then you will want the students to go back to their regular spots. At this point, you can do a silent transition back. Of course, the first few times you might need to, again with warmth and humor, ask them to try again until they can be true to your request. You could also give them a question to ask one person on their way back to their seats. If I haven't spent time seeing how everyone is that day, then I will tell them to ask 3 people how they are today on their way back to their seats. So the steps of a circle are call to circle, body warm-up, language warm-up, share, activity, transition back. As I'm sure you're aware, this is one way to do circle, and you can take from it what you want. Change a few things, or maybe many things, and configure the steps to suit your own style. I wanted to give you some ideas so that you could imagine them in your classroom, and so that you would have some tricks in reserve for your instruction. It would make me happy to know that you made it your own. Now that you know a possible structure for your circle and have some potential activities, I feel like I can speak about how to leverage the circle for true communication. Engage students with questions. And while we're on the topic, Bill Van Patten urges us to beware of not talking at our students, but with them. He urges us to involve the students by asking what they remember through what he calls a memorization quiz. I mentioned this when I was talking about what to do after a share, but I think that to leverage your circle, it helps to highlight this idea. In Van Patten's own words, in addition to having active little brains that process, organize, and store linguistic data, learners must actively participate in events in which they receive input. Instructors can't just throw input at learners. They must structure activities and tasks such that learners constantly indicate comprehension and react to messages they hear. So while in circle, make sure that you ask other students about one student's response to a question. When students are polled, ask if the resulting responses surprised students or confirm what they thought. Ask students if they heard anyone else give a response that they thought to be true themselves. Attempt spontaneous communication. Van Patten teaches us that students learn language by listening to meaningful messages that engage them and then using the language to negotiate meaning. This type of negotiation can happen at any point during the lesson when the teacher decides to build on a topic that comes up organically in class. These moments are hard to schedule. The teacher has to be ever ready to improvise in the moment. In my experience, while standing in a circle with your students, you will happen upon moments where you can direct the students' attention to a topic that comes up on its own. Let's say you ask your students what they did that weekend, and one of them says she walked the dog. The teacher can ask about the dog, what its name is, and what color it is. Then, even though you might have been right in the middle of asking students about their weekends, it is suddenly the right moment to ask who in the class has a dog, and if so, who in their family walks the dog. Moments of spontaneous communication like these come up whether you're sitting in a circle or not, but instruction in the circle lends itself so well to these kinds of moments. So my advice is to try to leverage the circle to make more of these moments. Look for the opportunities. Take time for spontaneous communication. To build the trust of your students, don't make anyone share, but ask questions that entice communication by following topics that come up naturally. Respond to students. Don't evaluate them. Instruction in a circle can play a key role in the effectiveness of your teaching when you are clear about the outcomes you're intending. For today's language teacher, the outcome tends to be something like to build community in the classroom where students share information about themselves in a low anxiety setting. This is different than wanting the outcome to be vocabulary building and grammatical accuracy. A nurturing community is the goal. It lends itself to communication, which is how language is learned. The book Enacting the Work of Language Instruction, High Leverage Teaching Practices by Eileen Gleason and Richard Donato points that to that end, the teacher doesn't respond to the student by evaluating their language, but instead continues the conversation by responding to the information contained in what the student said. This is key to leveraging the circle in your instruction. Learn to respond to students, and in so doing, share information, which is the communicative goal. Include writing in interpersonal communication. So we have covered how to use the circle to work on speaking and listening. What about using the circle to do some writing? When students aren't sitting behind their desks, they can still be asked to write in their journals, write on note cards, or write on stickies. If any of those prove difficult, students can always employ a clipboard to give them a hard surface to write on. My two examples of writing activities for Circle come from Darcy Rogers of OWL. I will call them Smash and Reader Response, though I don't think both of those names come from Darcy. Smash. Write down 3 things you think about a topic. Get in pairs and share. Write a new list together on common points. Then pairs become groups of 4 and then 8, each time doing the same activity. The end exercise is to have the large group share out their ideas. Reader response. In reader response, done in a circle of chairs facing out, the students first write on an index card and then use stickies to respond to others. Let me give an example for intermediate students. Students write down on one side of the card the causes of stress, and on the other side the things they do to relieve stress. Put the cards on the chairs facing out to be gallery walk. Give each student 3 stickies. Have students write 1 comment to 1 card and 2 questions to 2 other cards. Then in the big group, each person answers 1 question that was asked of them. Everyone takes their material home and writes a journal entry about stress, incorporating the questions and comments if they like. Another example, this time for novice high students, would be to ask students to draw a picture of something they like, and on the other side to write what they like. The comments could be something like, me too, or not me, and the questions could be to get more precise information. For example, a response to someone who said they like ice cream, do you like vanilla ice cream? This slide will be in the resources folder as a reminder. So to review, here are the ways to leverage your language instruction circle. Engage students with questions, attempt spontaneous communication, respond to students, don't evaluate them, include writing in interpersonal communication. I have shared many ideas here. Think about what you can make your own. Consider adding your next step to the comments to start a conversation with other teachers. This slide will also be in the resources folder. The first is the shortened URL for the resources folder, bit.ly/language circle. Thanks for watching today. I hope that this has been helpful. I will be sharing about how to incorporate current music in instruction in my next video. I hope to see you then.